Yeah. You know, it's kind of amazing to look at all these games here today. I couldn't imagine having this kind of collection when I was just a kid. In fact, when we were kids, we had to be much more selective about what games we could own in our library, as we really only got them for birthdays or Christmas. But unlike the kids of today, we actually had another option. We could go to a store and actually rent a game out to see if it was worth actually owning. These rented games then fell into 3 categories. Number 1 was a game you absolutely fell in love with immediately, and it was quickly added to your wish list. Number 2 was a game that you rented, you didn't really like, or you kind of hated, and you never really wanted to play it again. Then there was number 3, which was a game you rented and you really enjoyed, but for one reason or another, you just never ended up getting it, but you rented it a whole bunch of times. No game epitomizes that cliche more than the game I want to talk about today, Prisoner of War on the NES.
Remember all those great games we used to play growing up in the 80s and 90s? Most of them are sitting in an attic or garage somewhere doing nothing but gathering dust. My opinion is, we should give them another look.
I've often been accused of looking at games with rose-colored glasses because of my past experience with them, and that's a fair comment, so that's why today I want to take a look back on a game I know is far from perfect. P.O.W. may not be a masterpiece like Shatterhand or Bucky O'Hare, but there's no denying that it's just a ton of fun.
I will admit, I am a total product of the 80s and 90s, and growing up, war was a huge pop culture phenomenon due to movies like Rambo, Top Gun, and Navy SEALs, not to mention a little cartoon that kinda totally took over my life called G.I. Joe. As a kid growing up in that time period, all me and my friends wanted to do was play war with toy guns or with our G.I. Joe action figures. Then one Friday, on a weekly trip to the movie store to rent a game for the weekend, I first cast eyes upon the very cool box art for P.O.W. And I knew that there was no way I was going home without renting it. It was really the first opportunity we had to experience the war at home, and as long as the game wasn't boring, there was no way we weren't going to love it. The game starts with just such an explosive opening.
Ha! See what I did there?
Okay, so I wasn't just talking about the opening where the wall to your cell explodes, and you are unleashed into the heart of the POW camp with nothing to defend yourself except for your bare hands and some pretty stiff kicks. But the actual opening itself, combined with that epic music, just got me so fired up.
Oh, I'm so amped! Oh god, why did I do that?
The adrenaline rush continues as wave after wave of enemy came flooding toward me, and I kept knocking them off. And I mean right off the screen, look at them go! The action intensified in this scrolling brawler when I picked up a power-up such as the brass knuckles that increased the damage from my punch, or even a freaking machine gun to mow the enemies down. We spent many a weekend renting this game, and sometimes we would get to the end of the first level and come face to face with the chopper and escape over the wall, but most times we didn't. It was hard, and that was okay because all NES games were, and it was just so much fun that it didn't matter because it was war, and war is hell! But as time progressed, the rental faded away to obscurity, became nothing but a fond memory as our attention shifted to new systems, new games, and new experiences.
That is until a few years back when I decided to start collecting all the NES games. And of course, right at the top of the list was one of my fondest childhood rentals. And now that my tastes are a little bit more refined and my skills are at their sharpest, I'll finally get to truly enjoy the brilliance that this game is based on my nostalgia. Right? Or was I merely in love with a subpar arcade port, based solely on the theme?
I loved P.O.W. as a kid, and it could do no wrong in my books, but coming back to it years later, and there are some glaring problems that you encounter pretty early on. First off, for those of you, unlike me, that have friends and want to experience this game with them, unfortunately you are out of luck, as unlike the arcade version, it's solely a one-player experience. This is disappointing, but like I mentioned earlier, I usually play games by myself, and as long as it plays well, I should still easily love it. Well, it does, and it doesn't. The combat is simple enough, as you kick and punch your way through the enemy forces to escape the P.O.W. camp. The hit detection on the enemies is fairly good, so either the kick or punch will suffice and doesn't force you to use one over the other. But get ready for some pretty serious finger fatigue, because these enemies take a ton of hits. And I do mean a ton. There were times when I seriously had to question whether or not they were taking any damage at all. The early enemies are simple enough to fell and take 1 to 5 hits, but as the game progresses, expect the number of hits on even the simplest enemies to increase as well. Luckily, there is a power-up called the Brass Knuckles that increases your attack power, and you will be regularly taking out enemies with half of the effort. Even without the Brass Knuckles, it still isn't that much of a challenge. That it is until you start to get swarmed, and while you are hitting the enemy that you are focused on for the 37th or 38th time, another one attacks you from behind. This isn't uncommon in scrolling beat-em-up games like this, and we all know what to do. Use a jump attack or jump kick.
Time to go to the air and bring down some swift justice. Or do whatever the hell that was.
Yeah, I'm not really sure in what world that would be considered a jump kick. I mean, this is the same era as American Ninja or Jean-Claude Van Damme, so the programmers must have known what a martial arts jumping kick was supposed to look like, but went with a ballet jump from Swan Lake instead. Exquisite form aside, or in layman's terms, the stupid look of the kick isn't really the issue. It's in the attack range, as most jump kicks are downward sloping. Like in a great beat-em-up like Turtles 2 the arcade game. Ah, much better. But in P.O.W. this kick goes on an upward motion, and you have to be pretty much within regular striking distance for it to work, so a punch or kick would have sufficed just as well. The one benefit is that during the bizarre jump kick, you can avoid attacks and projectiles, so keep that in mind, but thankfully they don't rely too heavily on it in important situations. Like a boss fight. Well, if you can get past the endurance that is stage 2, you'll be face to face with a boss who can wipe you out immediately, unless you are proficient with the Swan Lake jump kick.
Well, this should be a pleasant experience. Perhaps I'll do a swan jump kick through the wall afterwards to wash it down.
But the attack mechanic isn't the only thing that makes this game needlessly difficult. There is also a little issue with scrolling. To progress the game, you have to move to the very right of the screen, and every now and then, it leads you directly into an oncoming enemy or enemy vehicle. You are given absolutely no warning or time to attack, so you just have to put up with the fact that sometimes, to move the level along, you're going to get hit, and lose some of your very limited health. You can restore your health within a level by defeating the enemies in a secret room, but most times these enemies swarm you, and you risk losing 1 if not 2 men just to get a minor health restore. This becomes a problem because the levels can be extremely long, and this is old school NES, so there isn't going to be a checkpoint to go back to. Nope, you are starting right back at the beginning of the level. The farthest I can get is to level 3 before I find the game becomes absolutely impossible to progress, as there are just too many enemies that you have to hit too many times. Luckily, there is a cheat code that can be used that will give you 20 lives. This makes the experience much more manageable, and with the extra insurance, it shouldn't be a problem to see this game to its conclusion at the end of level 6 after going face to face with a giant Arnold Schwarzenegger ripoff who is almost impossible to hit, and get this, even called Commando. Will you stop flipping already?
Well, I have just spent the majority of this review complaining about this game, so obviously I'm going to say stay far away from it. Of course I would, that's the only logical course of action. But I'm not, and for a very simple reason. Sure, P.O.W. is a far from perfect game with tons of nitpicky issues, but at its core, it's just a damn fun game.
While littered with nitpicky issues that could drive a man nuts, it's still just a fun experience, and most of what you do is very rewarding, such as picking up a power-up like the Brass Knuckles and easily knocking out the now one-hit enemies, to picking up the machine gun and mowing down everyone in sight with your limited ammo. The boss fights can be fun and inventive, like having to hit the chopper in Stage 1 with grenades, an attack variation that will return in Stage 5 when you face the giant tank, but this time it's a lot trickier. The music is actually really cool and keeps you engaged with the game and your pulse pounding, and is really underrated when the discussion comes up about some of the best music on the system. Overall, the game presents extremely well.
But really, none of that even matters. The key here that I'm trying to present to you is that it's fun. And at the end of the day, isn't that why we play games? You know, to have fun? If you're the kind of person that's looking for perfection, P.O.W. probably isn't the game for you. But if you want to have a ton of fun playing a decent looking game with a great soundtrack that's going to kick your ass but leave you smiling afterwards, take a chance on it. Because it's a relatively cheap game that I still have as much fun playing today as I did when I was a kid. I am the manliest man that ever did, man. Kinda like Chuck Norris and Missing in Action. Well, maybe more like Hulk Hogan and Mr. Nanny.